Our Torah portion tonight takes us from the threat of Israel's annihilation to their salvation at the sea. And I'd like to focus on one little piece of this monumental story, the ninth of the 10th plagues, the one that finally loosened Pharaoh's grip, though it did not totally change his mind. It's the plague of darkness, which I'd like to share with you a few of the verses, and then I'll have some thoughts about it. These are the words that I wanted to share from this Torah portion tonight. And I'm going to read them and then you can follow them on the screen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Netei yadcha al hashamayim, vayehi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim, vayamesh choshech. God said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Vayet Moshe et yado al hashamayim, vayhi choshech afela bechol eretz Mitzrayim shloshet yamim. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. Lo ra'u ish et achiv velo lo kamu ish mitachtav shloshet yamim. Ulachol v'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvatam. So people couldn't see one another. For 3 days, no one could get up from where he was. But at the same time, all of the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. Vayikra Pharaoh el Moshe, and then Pharaoh finally summoned Moses to him and said, Vayomer l'chu ivdu et Adonai, go and worship your God. Rak sonchem uvkarchem yutzag, gam tapchem yelech imachem. But your flocks and your herds have to be left behind, even though your children can come with you. So let's go back and figure out how we got here. The first eight of these 10 plagues were designed not only to terrify the Egyptians, but literally to starve them into submission to Israel's gods, or perhaps to rise up against Pharaoh. From the river of blood that poisoned the water of the Nile River, from which fields were irrigated, to the plagues of frogs and lice and locust that ate up whatever was growing, to the cow disease that made the meat inedible, to the raging hailstorms that pummeled even the most hardy crops. The Egyptians could see threats rising to their very survival. It was punishment in kind, a reminder to the Pharaoh who wanted to destroy these foreigners in his midst, that it had been an Israelite, Joseph, who had saved his people generations before by storing and parceling everything out, every morsel that was grown, to see them through 7 years of famine. Now they would have no time and no opportunity to save themselves. But then God switches directions. The ninth plague is unlike the first 8. It has nothing to do with what people will or won't be able to eat. It is designed simply to strike terror into their hearts. As the text says, V'yamesh choshech, a darkness that can be touched. Now, we know that darkness can be a scary thing. Many of us needed a nightlight when we were kids to make us feel safe. But we also know that the night will give way to daylight at its proper time, just the way God designed it at the beginning of creation. The greatest of all Torah scholars, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, whom we know as Rashi, likens the word vayamesh, to touch, to the word mamash, which means something of substance. The darkness was so thick it could be touched, and no light could penetrate it or push it away. Each Egyptian sat in this thick dense darkness for 3 days, unable to see another human being, unable to strike a fire or even light a candle for warmth and comfort. In contrast, we are told, the Israelites had light in their dwellings. While the Torah emphasizes the physical nature of the darkness, Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer, an Orthodox sage from 19th century Belarus, also known as the Even HaEzel, taught that it represented emotional and spiritual darkness. The greatest darkness, he wrote, is when a person does not see his fellow and does not participate in the distress of others. In the case of the Egyptians, he said, when Torah tells us they did not see one another, it means their senses were dulled to what others were experiencing. And that makes a lot of sense considering all we know about the Egyptians. They, like their Pharaoh, had become unrelentingly brutal in their treatment of the Israelites with whom they had once dwelt so peacefully. They too had hardened their hearts to the Israelites. And so it was only a very short step to closing themselves off physically and emotionally from each other as well. They could not see one another, the Torah tells us, and for 3 days, no one could get up from his place where he was. In stark contrast, the light shining from the Israelite homes throughout those 3 days reflected the divine spark that God had implanted in the Jewish people, a light that comforted them and that promised the Israelites redemption from their misery. In fact, the great sage known as the Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir of 12th century France, the Rashbam takes it a step further. He comments here that when the Torah says that the Israelites had light in their dwellings, it means that they had light even if they dwelt in an Egyptian's house. Think of that. That means that the light isn't within the homes. The light is within every single Israelite, each and every one of them glowing with a spark of divine love. That's what they saw in each other. And that is why they trusted each other. And that is why they held their hands out to each other. And as one people were able to leave Egypt and bondage forever. We here tonight, all of us, everyone we know and love, all of us have been through a long period of darkness in our country and throughout the world. It is a physical impediment, something tangible, something deep and dark, something that the sun cannot penetrate. Our darkness has kept us isolated from one another, physically and emotionally. It has devastated many among us psychologically and financially. Unlike the Egyptians, we are not all responsible for the deep darkness that surrounds us, although some among us have made it even thicker and heavier with careless and thoughtless behavior. And yet there are so many others among us who shine with that divine light of hope and love. The frontline medical workers who have put themselves in harm's way for nearly a year now. The scientists who've so quickly developed the tests to make us aware and the vaccines to make us safe. Those who work at food banks and those who contribute to them. The teachers across the country who day after day must overcome overwhelming challenges of educating and inspiring our children. Somehow, they are all able to penetrate the darkness that threatens to choke us. Their light gives us hope that humanity will soon be able to walk through the dry seabed to freedom. It will be a frustratingly long journey. It is a narrow passage because of the piecemeal approach to testing and the lack of available vaccines. But let's not forget what Torah teaches us. Every single one of us has that divine spark of light inside us, just waiting to be seen. Our own attitudes and our own behavior determine whether we will be beacons of light for each other to help us all through that dry riverbed. As the amazing Amanda Gorman challenged each of us in the conclusion of her inaugural poem on Wednesday, we will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When the day comes, we step out of the shade aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. In a recent newspaper column, E.J. Dionne reminded us, 2020 taught us just how fragile life can be. It's a burden better borne in solidarity with each other. Solidarity is what sparked the light to shine from each and every Israelite in Egypt. Solidarity is what will cause our own lights to shine. When we clear a sidewalk for a neighbor during the snowstorm headed our way on Monday. When we round up at the Martin's checkout counter, where mere pennies donated by a lot of us can make a huge difference for a family that is food insecure. When we swing by the Roaring Spring Community Library to drop off warm coats and scarves and hats, or personal toiletries and toiletry bags for people who need basic items that most of us take for granted. When we check on the Mutual Aid Blair County Facebook page to see what our neighbors could use this week and what might be in short supply. Solidarity with our relatives, our friends, our neighbors, and even people we don't know will lead us out of this deep darkness and allow us to see the light and to be the light. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will and our mission as we say together, Amen.